Hello. So remember we talked about the French Revolution. As you see here, there was a lot of killing, a lot of rioting, and the National Assembly, they wanted to have a different form of government. But a lot of this turned very violent, very different, very fast, right? And we're going to talk about that in this new episode, or these new guided notes 9.2, Radical Revolution and the Rise and Fall of Napoleon Bonaparte. So let's get going. So let's talk about this move to radicalism. And radicalism is very fast, rapid change. So we have a new government, per se, or a new body called the National Convention that came out of the National Assembly, which came out of the Third Estate, when the Third Estate kind of gathered together to create this new constitution called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. And that was their independence, document, but also sort of established this constitution, right? And in September 21st, 1792, they discussed in this new constitution to abolish the monarchy and set up France as a republic. And a republic is a country or a state in which supreme power is held by the people and their elected representatives, and usually has an elected or nominated president. So in this case, now France is now moving towards a republic. Okay, and that is your answer for number 1 and your vocabulary word, republic. Okay. So here we have the execution of King Louis XVI. King Louis XVI and his wife, Marie Antoinette, were both beheaded by the guillotine. King Louis XVI first, and then later his wife was guillotined, or beheaded by guillotine. And that's this apparatus right here. And ironically enough, the person that suggested this apparatus, his name was Dr. Guillotine. He did not create it, but he suggested it to King Louis XVI, and now King Louis XVI is beheaded by the same apparatus that was suggested to him. So the execution created, or the king's execution created a lot of new enemies for this revolution, especially outside of France, that is, because they saw it as a threat to their country. So they wanted this rebellion, or they wanted this revolution to calm down and quell down. So they were going to try to get King Louis back in power as much as possible, but now he's beheaded. So new government, right? And this is a depiction of, or a drawing of, his execution. As you see here, they have his head and they're showing his head to the crowd, and that is a way to verify that he is in fact dead. Okay. All right, so France is now in this crisis, and there's tons of rioting, murders, just a lot of killing and so forth all over France, right? Especially in Paris. So the National Convention now gives these broad powers, or these general powers, to a special committee of 12 known as the Committee of Public Safety, and they take control of the government for about a year. And they adopt these policies that are very strict. And it became known as, or became called, the Reign of Terror. And that's what people call them, because it was so violent, so strict. To the point where they set up these revolutionary courts that prosecuted in this case meaning killed, counter-revolutionaries, people that wanted radical, fast change in the revolution, and also those that were against the revolution. They were quote-unquote prosecuted. Read that as killed, okay? Because that's what happened. And this is the person that became almost like the leader of the Committee of Public Safety, and he dominated the Committee of Public Safety. His name was Maximilian Pierre. And he was supported by the Jacobins, which was this influential political group during the French Revolution that pushed for the ending of the king and this rise of the French Republic. And Maximilian Robespierre believed that France ought to, not could it be, but he's projecting his opinion or his idea that France should be made up of a democratic republic of good, and good is in quotations here because this is his idea of good citizens. And he believed that these extreme policies or this reign of terror was necessary in order to achieve the goal that he had in mind of this republic of virtuous citizens in France, right? Which means that he took matters by any means necessary. Read that as kill. Okay. So the Committee of Public Safety and the National Convention enacted these types of policies as you see here. Primary education for all. Not so bad, right? Controlling food and fuel prices, clothing, to try to lower the prices of those things because they were really high. One big one, slavery being abolished in French colonies, especially places like Haiti. Remember we talked about Toussaint Louverture. Toussaint Louverture was the general and the leader of the Haitian Revolution. But remember, enslaved Africans like him heard about this same policy that was put in place by the Committee of Public Safety. And now they heard they are free. There is no more slavery. They're hearing this from Frenchmen and French plantation owners in Haiti. So they're like, hey, we heard we're free. What's going on, right? And later on, there's something that's going to happen. And Mr. Toussaint Louverture says, oh, no. And that's how the Haitian Revolution starts, okay? They also pursued a policy of de-Christianization, meaning they're moving away from a Christian policy or a Christian society. And they also established a new calendar where they added some months and some dates to their calendar. It didn't work out, but nonetheless, that's what they enacted. Now, Robespierre, with all of his zealousness and all of his ideas, right? He became really obsessed of trying to get rid of corrupt elements in France. And now the National Convention is afraid of him. And they're saying, okay, well, if he's doing this to everybody else, what about us? When is he going to get to us? So they were afraid that they're going to be guillotined too. So they cooked up an idea and said, okay, we got to get rid of him. So they gathered enough votes to condemn him. And now here, as you see here, July 28th, 1794, he is sentenced to the guillotine, gets beheaded, just like King Louis XVI. So here's a quick check. Would you consider Robespierre a hero or a villain? Let me know in your guided notes and in Edpuzzle. Alright, so here's some things to consider. Robespierre was a big advocate for abolition of slavery. Very big advocate. He created a lot of enemies because he was such a big advocate for abolition of slavery. Why? Because the majority of the Second Estate, or what was the Second Estate, and the bourgeois of France owned plantations in those French colonies. They didn't want to get rid of that. So with him talking about abolition of slavery and now creating that abolition of slavery, that caused problems, and they want to get rid of him pretty quickly, and which they did. All right, so now that Robespierre is beheaded, the king is now beheaded, they need a new government system outside of the National Convention. So there was a committee of 5 that was created under this new constitution called the Directory. And the Directory, as you see here, was running the government for a bit from 1795 to 1799. But they became known to being corrupt. And in order to stay in power and keep that their greediness, and their corruption in play, they became militaristic, or they relied heavily on the military to keep their power. But they did not count on one particular and very successful and popular general while he was in the directory, or while he was in the military, to come in and take over and demolish the directory and now become in power. And his name was Napoleon Bonaparte, and he launched what is called a coup d'etat, and that is French, and it means to overthrow the government or overthrow a government system by force. And that is exactly what Napoleon did. That is called a coup d'etat, and that's one of your vocabulary words. All right, so here's Napoleon Bonaparte, and this is sort of how he rose to power. He became commander of the French armies in Italy, and he won a series of battles because he was very good at what he did. Speed, decision making, surprise attacks, etc. So that energy and that initiative that he had created devotion with his troops, and now allowed him to win the support of the military and a lot of people around him. So then he was given more opportunity to lead command of the army to invade Britain. He knew that the French would not be able to handle an invasion or to invade Britain. So instead, he decided to go and invade Egypt to get to India. India was a colony of Britain, and he figured that he'd be able to break down Britain that way. Didn't work out. They didn't win Egypt, and he left his troops in Egypt, and he hightailed it back to France, okay, and started his reign in France, okay. So after the toppling or the coup d'etat in 1793, he overthrew the directory, and now he set up this new government called the consulate, and here he declared himself the first consul. And this is kind of the start of his rise to power, okay. He appointed officials, he controlled the army. He's now the greatest thing since sliced bread for the military. He conducted foreign affairs. He influenced the legislature, right, the committee, the National Convention. So by 1802, he made himself consul for life. And you're probably wondering, what? Let's move on. We're not done. 2 years later, 1804, he is now crowned himself as Emperor of France. That's 1804, okay? We're going to get back to that in just a minute. But just to backtrack, while he was consul for life in 1801, or the first consul, he made an agreement with the Pope to recognize Catholicism as the main religion of France. And in return, the Pope was able to give back some of the lands that was taken during the French Revolution. Okay, so it was kind of a give and take for Napoleon. But nonetheless, now Napoleon Bonaparte is Emperor of France. I know what you're thinking. Isn't that a step back from what they actually wanted in the first place? When you think about it and you tell me that in Edpuzzle, do you think this was a step back of what they actually wanted in the first place? You let me know. And here is where he is getting crowned, or he's actually crowning himself emperor. And this is his wife Josephine kneeling beside him. All right, so one of the big things that Napoleon is most noted for is his achievement to codify the laws of France, which means that he organized them in such a way that it made sense, okay? And those were called the Civil Code or the Napoleonic Code. And those Napoleonic codes, as you see here, included equality for the citizen before the law, an individual to choose their profession. So there's no longer this third estate thing. They can choose what profession that they wanted to do. There's now religious toleration. Even though the main religion is Catholicism, people can choose what religion that they want to. And then there was also an abolition of serfdom or feudalism or feudal obligation, meaning those third estate people, or those people that was once third estate, they do not have to be in serfdom anymore. Okay. Now for women and children, it wasn't the same case. The civil code was a step back. Now, realize this. In this civil code as well, it was a step back for enslaved Africans, because he repealed, meaning he took back the abolition law from the Committee of Public Safety. So he's saying now, well, no, slavery is not ended here. We're going to keep slavery. The enslaved Africans in Haiti said, oh no, oh hell no, right? And now they pushed themselves to try to become free in that same year, 1804, and eventually the Haitian Revolution, under the leadership of Toussaint Louverture, they become free and independent in that same year. Was Napoleon Bonaparte upset about it? Yes, he was. He was quite upset. Very, very upset about that. So now Napoleon establishes this new bureaucracy. It's a very centralized or moderate run machine of a government, very powerful, because he focuses his government on their ability and how well they're able to perform. He's not looking at how a monarchy was set up in terms of, okay, they're inheriting their stuff, or nepotism, right, by rank or birth, meaning that they were born into this. He really made sure that military officers and his public officials had to show their ability and had to show their skill in running a successful, or being a powerful, successful official in the government. Okay. And with all leaders, some rise and they have to fall, right, at some point. As you see here, the spread of revolutionary principles such as equality, religious toleration, and economic freedom was an important factor, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean countries like Haiti, right? And that was a major contributor to the fall of Napoleon. Okay, and there are two major reasons for Napoleon's collapse. He was unable to bring down Britain. Britain was his downfall. Okay, he was just not able to bring down Britain as an empire. And also this idea of nationalism, as we mentioned before, in Latin America and the Caribbean, like in Haiti, a lot of them unified as a nation and wanted their independence. And from that, they were losing their colonies, and from them losing their colonies, that means France is losing their money. If they're losing their money, they don't have the resources to go to war, and therefore the country falters. Okay, especially Napoleon in this case. And one of the most important factors I mentioned here was nationalism, right? He marched his armies into countries all over Brazil, in places like Venezuela, in a lot of the Caribbean islands, Martinique, Dominica, Saint Martin, okay, Haiti. A lot of them, you know, he marched them in and had his brothers and his family run those countries, right? But he wasn't counting on the fact of these two things, that these conquered peoples are going to become united and they're going to hate their invader, in this case Napoleon, right, and his family coming in to run their country. And those conquered people saw this power and strength in being united, and that national feeling of being united. Now we are Haiti. Now we are Saint Martinique. Now we are Dominica. Now we are Brazil, right? They're coming together and seeing themselves as a unified nation, and now they want to become an independent country. Okay. So Napoleon's downfall began in 1812 when he decided to invade Russia, as you see here. He didn't account for those harsh winters when the snow began, and he led his army into Russia, and Russia countered him by getting rid of all of the food. Okay, And only, as you see here, 40,000 of his military or his men survived that invasion of Russia. And the constant warfare caused the collapse of Napoleon's empire. And he lost his final battle in Belgium with Britain at the Battle of Waterloo in 1814. And then Paris was then captured. Okay. And from there, Paris and France came into a new monarchy once again under King Louis. Was it King Louis? King Louis the 17th? I believe so. I'll make sure that I note that for you. And that is pretty much our ending here. And from this, I would love for you to apply it. Based on these images shown here, how did Napoleon's rule in France and the people's perception of him change over time based on this photo that you see here? So we have image A, image B, and then image C. How did their perception change about him over time based on these paintings? And based on what you learn about Napoleon Bonaparte, would he be a hero or is he a villain? And tell me why. Why do you think so? Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video.